Chapter 15. Jill stood next to Carlos at the train's controls, looking out as the dark ruins of Raccoon slowly slipped past. They couldn't see much by the yellow beam of the signal headlight, but there were numerous small fires blazing unchecked, and a partial moon shone its cold light down on it all. Debris, packed streets, broken, boarded windows, living shadows that swayed and wandered aimlessly. "Keep it slow," Jill said. "If the tracks are blocked and we're going too fast," Carlos shot her an irritated look. "Gee, I hadn't thought about that. Gracias." His sarcasm invited a reply, but Jill was too tired to banter, and her body felt like a single, massive bruise. "Yeah, okay. Sorry." The tracks unrolled in front of them as Carlos carefully handled the controls, slowing to a virtual crawl with each curve. Jill wanted to sit, maybe go into the other car with Mikhail and lay down. It was a few miles to the clock tower, and a jogger could easily keep up with them. But she knew that Carlos was tired too. She could at least suffer aching feet along with him for another few minutes. By some unspoken agreement, they hadn't discussed Nikolai yet, perhaps because speculation on where he was and what he was doing didn't serve any purpose. Whatever he was up to, they were getting out of town. Assuming they survived, Jill was more committed than ever to seeing that Umbrella paid for their crimes, and it was Umbrella, not Nikolai, who held responsibility for the death of Raccoon. Her intuition had been good on Nikolai, that he wasn't ignorant of Umbrella's evils, though she hadn't suspected the depth of his deception. From what she'd read in the journal Carlos had found, it appeared that the company had been prepared for Raccoon to be infected and had set up a secret team to make reports of the catastrophe. It was disgusting, but not surprising. "We're dealing with Umbrella after all. If they can illegally design genetic viruses and breed killing machines to inject said viruses into, why not capitalize on mass murder? Take some notes, document a few fights." Jill stumbled against Carlos as the trolley rocked, the sound of shattering glass coming from the other car. A half-second later, they heard Mikhail let out a fevered cry, of fear or pain. Jill couldn't tell. "Here, take the controls," Carlos said, but she was already halfway across the car, the heavy revolver in hand. "I got it. Keep us going," she shouted back, not wanting to think about what it could be as she dashed toward the door. For the trolley to shake like that, it has to be one of their monsters, and Mikhail probably can't even sit up on his own. She pushed the door open and stepped onto the connecting platform, the heavy clatter of the moving trolley seeming incredibly loud as she opened the second door, Mikhail's helplessness in the forefront of her mind. Oh shit. The elements of the scene were simple, straightforward, and deadly. A broken window, glass everywhere, Mikhail to her left, his back to the wall as he struggled to get to his feet, using his rifle as a crutch. And the Stars Killer standing in the middle of the car, misshapen head thrown back, its giant lipless mouth opening as it growled, screamed wordlessly. The remaining window shook from the strength of its insane cry. Jill opened fire, each shot a deafening explosion, the heavy round slamming into its upper torso as it continued to howl. The sheer force of the assault drove it back a few steps, but if there was any effect otherwise, she couldn't see it. On the sixth round, Mikhail's rifle joined in, the smaller slugs peppering the Nemesis's gigantic legs as Jill went dry. Mikhail was still slumped against the wall, and his aim was poor, but Jill would take any help she could get. She grabbed her Beretta. Even with the speed loader, the 357 would take too long, and opened up, going for headshots. Not working. And the Nemesis stopped screaming and fixed its attention on her, its slitted white eyes like cataracts, its huge teeth shining and slick, tentacles snaked around its hairless, lumpy head. "Get out!" Mikhail shouted, and Jill spared him a glance, not even considering the idea. She fired again, until it registered an instant later that he was holding a grenade, one shaking finger through its hooked ring. She recognized the make without thinking about it. A Czech RG-34. Barry had collected anti-personal grenades, as she sent a round into the Nemesis' stitched brow to no effect. Impact grenade. Once the ring was pulled, it detonated on contact. "And Mikhail won't make it. It's suicide." "No, you go! Get behind me!" she screamed, and the Stars Killer took one massive step forward, almost halving the distance between them. "Get out!" Mikhail ordered again, and popped the ring, an expression of incredible concentration and purpose on his dead white face. "I'm dead already. Do it now!" Her Beretta fired once more and was empty. Jill spun and ran, leaving Mikhail to face the monster alone. Carlos heard the yelling amidst the shots as he worked to bring the trolley to a stop, desperate to help Jill and Mikhail. But they were in the middle of a relatively tight curve, and the poorly maintained controls fought his efforts. He was about a second from joining them anyway when the door behind him crashed open. Carlos whipped around, one-arming his M16 as he instinctively kept his other hand on the throttle, and saw Jill. She practically flew into the car, her expression a mask of expectant terror, his name forming on her lips. And a tremendous shock of fire and sound loomed up behind her, pushing her to dive, a clumsy shoulder roll that was punctuated by the echoing boom crash from the second car. Tongues of flame burst through the back door's window as the floor tilted wildly. Carlos slammed against the driver's seat, the chair's arm whacking him mid-thigh hard enough to bring tears to his eyes. Mikhail! Carlos took one faltering step toward the back and saw only burning pieces of the obliterated second car dragging behind him, falling away as the trolley picked up speed. There was no chance that Mikhail could have survived, and Carlos started having serious doubts about their own chances as Jill stumbled forward, her face haunted by whatever she'd seen. The cable car hit another curve, and then it was out of control, tossing back and forth like a ship on stormy seas, except the thunder and lightning were caused by their cars smashing mightily into buildings and autos alike, sending up great plumes of sparks. Instead of slowing them down, the trolley seemed to be picking up speed with each impact, hurtling through the dark in a series of fiery metal screams. Carlos fought gravity to grab the throttle, aware that they'd jumped the tracks, that Mikhail was gone, that their only hope was the manual brake. If they were very lucky, the wheels would lock. He yanked back as hard as he could. And nothing happened, nothing at all. They were screwed. Jill made it to the front, clutching at chair backs and support poles as the trolley continued to buck and screech. Carlos saw her staring at the useless throttle beneath his fingers, saw despair flash in her eyes, and he knew that they had to jump. "The brakes!" Jill shouted. "No good! We have to bail!" He turned, grabbed his rifle by the barrel, and used the lock stock to break out a side window. A sudden shift of the floor sending the glass shards raining on his chest. He held on to the slick window frame with one hand, reached back to grab Jill, and saw her drive her elbow into a small glass panel set low into the console, a look of crazed hope on her face as she pulled a switch he couldn't see. And incredibly, the trolley was slowing, tipping to the left the final time before settling back, sliding forward in a diminishing spray of bright sparks. Carlos closed his eyes and gripped the useless throttle, tensing, trying to prepare himself for the impact. And a few seconds later, a mild, anticlimactic crunch signified their journey's end. The car had come to a rest against a pile of broken concrete pieces in the middle of a neatly trimmed lawn, a few shadowy statues, and hedges nearby. A final tremor rattled through the car, and it was over. Silence, except for the tick of cooling metal. He opened his eyes, hardly able to credit their nightmare ride through the city. Next to him, Jill took a shaky breath. It had all happened so fast, it was a miracle that he and Jill were still alive. "Mikhail?" he asked softly. Jill shook her head. "It was the tyrant thing, the stars, Nemesis. Mikhail had a grenade. It kept coming at us and he—" Her voice broke, and she reached into her pack and started to reload her weapons, concentrating on the simple movements. It seemed to calm her. When she spoke again, her voice was firm. "Mikhail sacrificed himself when he saw that the Nemesis was coming after me." She looked away, out into the dark as a chill wind drafted through the trolley's shattered windows. Her shoulders slumped. Carlos wasn't sure what to say. He stepped toward her, gently touching one abraded shoulder, and felt her body stiffen beneath his fingers. He quickly dropped his hand, afraid that he'd offended her somehow, and then realized that she was staring out at something, a look of pure amazement on her delicate features. Carlos followed her gaze, looking out and up to see a giant 3- or 4-story tower looming over them, silhouetted against a backdrop of clouded night sky. A glowing white clock face near the top read that it was almost midnight. "Somebody loves us, Carlos," Jill said, and Carlos could only nod mutely. They had reached the clock tower. Nikolai walked along the moonlit tracks, not bothering to conceal himself as he plodded west. He'd be able to see anything coming and kill it long before it reached him. He was in a foul mood and almost welcomed the opportunity to blow the guts out of something, human or otherwise. His anger had abated somewhat, giving way to a rather fatalistic state of mind. It no longer seemed feasible for him to track down the dying platoon leader and 2 young soldiers. Basically, there just wasn't enough time. It would take at least an hour for him to make it to the clock tower, assuming they could figure out how to ring the bells. They'd be long gone by the time he got there. Nikolai scowled, working to remind himself that his plans hadn't changed, that he still had an agenda to fulfill. 4 people were unwittingly waiting for him. After Dr. Aquino, there were the soldiers, Chan and a Sergeant Ken Franklin, and the factory worker, Foster. When they were all out of the way, Nikolai still had to collate their data, arrange a meeting, and copter out. He had plenty to do, yet he couldn't help feeling cheated by the circumstances. He stopped walking, cocking his head to one side. He heard a crash, an impact of some kind further west, perhaps even a small explosion muffled by distance. A second later, he felt the slightest of vibrations coming from the trolley tracks. The tracks ran down the middle of a main street. Anything solid could have given them a jolt. But it's them. It's Mikhail and Carlos and Jill Valentine. They ran into something, or something went wrong with the engine. Or he didn't know what, but he was suddenly quite sure that they had encountered trouble. It reinforced for him to have the positive feeling that he was the one with the skill. They were forced to rely on luck, and not all luck was good. Perhaps we will meet again. Anything is possible, especially in a place like this. Ahead of him and to the left, from in between an office building and a fence lot, came a gurgling groan, then another. 3 infected shambled out into the open, 10 meters or so from where he stood. They were too far away to make out clearly in the waxy moonlight, but Nikolai could see that none of them were in good shape. 2 were missing arms, and the third's legs had somehow been cut down, so that it seemed to be walking on its knees, each stumbling footstep creating a noise like someone smacking their lips. The closest complained, and Nikolai shot it through its disintegrating brains. 2 more shots, and the other 2 joined the first, collapsing to the asphalt in wet thumps. He felt much better. Whether or not he got an opportunity to see his duplicitous comrades again, and he found that he felt strongly that he would. He was the superior man, and he would triumph in the end. The awareness filled him with a new energy. Nikolai broke into a trot, eager to meet whatever challenge came next.